we keep telling ourselves, it's not as bad as it looks. It's not as bad as it looks. I'm here to tell you, it's worse than it looks. The United States is in a much darker place than people realize. And Donald Trump is not going to soften his message or check himself. It's going to get darker.
Tenk deg at du jobber I hjertet av den amerikanske staten. Du en byråkrat som har tilgang til de innerste rommene. Du ser absolutt alt. Og så innser du at det som skjer ikke bare inkompetent, men det farlig. Hva gjør du da?
Miles Taylor, han jobbet som stabssjef I det amerikanske Department of Homeland Security, altså innenlandssikkerhet, da han valgte å varsle om at president Trump var en trussel mot USAs sikkerhet, sånn som han så det. Anonymt først. Han skrev en kronikk I New York Times der han advarte mot presidentens oppførsel uten å røpe hvem han var. I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration var overskriften, og alle lurte. Hvem denne Anonymous?
Da han noen år senere sto frem med fullt navn, så skrev Trump 7 ord på Twitter som vi skal komme tilbake til, og Taylor han fikk livet fullstendig snudd på hodet. Og det fortalte han deg da du møtte han I Bergen, Tuva, for ikke så lenge siden, men det var så vidt han kom seg dit.
Ja, faktisk, fordi Taylor, han lever nå på skjulte adresser. Han må flytte hele tida. Og han var rett og slett redd for at han skulle bli tatt før han kom seg til mediedager I Bergen I begynnelsen av mai. Men det sa han ikke til de som ledet konferansen I redsel for at de skulle avlyse fordi de var redde for hans sikkerhet. Og dermed la Trump vinne, ikke sant? Det utrolig viktig for ham å reise rundt og fortelle om det han har sett som en del av den første regjeringen til Trump. Og på mediedager så hadde han en sesjon som samlet alle deltakerne, tror jeg, og som ikke ble streamet samtidig som den pågikk for hans sikkerhet, og den gikk rett I hjertet på oss alle sammen.
Dette en historie du ikke vil gå glipp av. Dette Bak nyhetene med Elin Ludvigsen, en helt spesiell utgave, nemlig et intervju med Trump-varsleren Miles Taylor.
Ja, og det starter på begynnelsen, nemlig med hvorfor Taylor valgte å skrive denne kronikken I New York Times om the resistance within the Trump administration. Det var en spesiell ting presidenten gjorde som traff ham på et personlig plan da han var på vei til Australia. Det var det som ble dråpen.
There were a lot of reasons to feel frustrated inside the Trump administration. But the thing that caused it all to come tumbling down in my mind was a very personal thing. I was on the way to Australia for a meeting of Western countries, the Five Eyes intelligence community, America's closest intelligence partners. And when I was on the way over to Australia, one of my mentors passed away, Senator John McCain. And he was a Republican that was one of the few Republicans in the first Trump administration to constantly stand up to the president. And so I was sort of grieving his death on the way to Australia. And then I get to the hotel, and in the middle of the night, I get this phone call from the White House. And I'm told that the president wants to raise the American flags back up. So to give you context, anytime a U.S. senator dies, all the flags across the country are at half staff in honor of that person. And Donald Trump so hated John McCain that he wanted to actively dishonor him by forcing people to put the flags back up to the top. And I get this phone call in the middle of the night in my hotel room, and I'm stunned because it's like a bad man is dancing on the grave of a good one. And not just a good one, someone who had been a mentor to me. And it may be more detailed than people want, but I popped out of bed in my boxers and I went over to the hotel room desk and I just started writing. And at first I thought it would be a journal entry. And I was just writing about how bad this administration was from the inside, the president's inclination towards illegality, but also just his unethical nature, like the John McCain episode. And somewhere as I was writing, I decided, why am I just keeping this to myself? These are things that the actual voters should understand are happening. And before I could talk myself out of it, I shot a note to a friend at the New York Times and said, I think I might want to say something from inside the administration. And then it went from there.
Wow. Would you say the flag thing, is that typical Trump?
It's typical Trump, but very atypical. In fact, I don't think there's a single example in American history of a president saying, you know, I didn't like that guy, so let's dishonor him by putting the flags back up. And that really just hit me in a personal way, but it's so indicative of the type of man that he is. And like I said, there were bigger reasons to turn against Donald Trump in that window, far more egregious decisions than that. But when it got that personal for me, I realized there's no hoping that this thing is going to somehow get better and that we're going to right the ship. In fact, there's very little standing between us and the president abusing his power for personal gain.
Og McCain, han var en republikansk senator fra Arizona, og en av de få som turte å kritisere Trump. Og det var Trumps mangel på respekt i å nekte å ha flaggene på halv stang da McCain døde, som fikk dråpen til å renne over for Taylor.
Yes, og han skrev først som anonym, som nevnt, men han skjønte at han måtte stå frem etter hvert, og at han da kom til å bli hunted forever, som han sier, altså forfulgt for alltid, egentlig. Fordi allerede da han skrev den kronikken anonymt, så skrev Trump på Twitter treason, som altså landsforræderi, altså, eller det som folk ble skutt for i Norge etter krigen.
Vi skal høre ham fortelle om det.
When the opinion piece published, the first thing that Donald Trump said was that he tweeted out a 7-letter tweet in all caps, and it said treason.
Yeah.
And to him, criticism from within his own ranks was treasonous, right?
What is that?
Well, it's the highest crime you can be charged with in the United States.
Yeah.
Treason means you've gone against the nation, and it's a crime by law that's punishable by death. So the president of the United States, after I published criticism of his handling of the presidency, accused me of doing a crime punishable by death. And in some ways, ironically, he was proving my point. And my point was that this man is unfit for office, and he's violating the guardrails of democracy. And his response was to criticize protected speech, free speech, by saying it was treasonous. But I knew he wouldn't stop until he found me and until he could find a way to exact revenge against me. And it's one of the things that I went on to warn about more publicly, is that if he was reelected, he would turn the presidency into a revenge machine, and he would use the powers of government to try to go after his enemies, myself included. And of course, he lost in 2020, and that didn't happen. But as soon as he won again in 2024, the wheels in his mind started turning. How can I go after my enemies? And that's exactly what he's done. He's brought the full force of the federal government after myself and other people who criticized him.
You received death threats at a point. Can you tell me a little about that?
Yeah. There, one of the things that I didn't anticipate thoroughly enough was the degree to which Donald Trump supporters would come out of the woodwork and threaten me. And not just me, but my extended family members. When I unmasked myself and came forward and claimed credit for the anonymous opinion pieces against Donald Trump, I got hate mail, I got phone calls threatening to kill me. I received very, very graphic and vile emails. But what I hadn't anticipated is that my brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews would get the same thing. Cool. So much so, I mean, there were Trump supporters who were sending photos outside of my sister's house and posting pictures of my niece in the den watching television to threaten in a not so subtle way that if I didn't shut up, something terrible would happen to them.
Random supporters?
Random supporters, people I'd never met in my life. Some of them are still under investigation. We had stalkers that crossed the line legally and who we had to report to federal authorities. We had to move, out of our home. I moved to a, place outside of Washington, D.C. that exists under someone else's name because we were getting doxxed. My location was being revealed as I went to different places. And there was a period of time for several months where I had an armed security detail because authorities were so worried about the threats that they anticipated one of those Trump supporters might come and just try to shoot me. And so I had an armed guard everywhere I went during the day and at nighttime. And then in addition to that, they recommended that I keep a firearm in the safe house that I was staying in. So God forbid if something happened to the security detail outside that, my protection of last resort would be this Sig Sauer P365 pistol that I kept with me right in my bed. That has a psychological impact on you, for sure.
Why is what you were doing so scary to people that they actually have to go to that length to threaten to kill you?
I think when you are in deep, deep denial of the truth, you'll do anything to keep that truth alive. Your truth alive, even if that means killing, in this case, literally, the real truth. And in this case, Trump supporters fervently did not want to believe that Donald Trump was corrupt, that he was acting in his own self-interest. So many of them wanted to believe what he said, that he was their savior, that he was, in his words, their retribution, that he was the answer to anything in their lives they were unhappy about. And to be told that that's not true, to be told who the man really is sort of a violation of their sense of self. How could they be so fooled and deceived all of these years? And for some people, that makes them so mad to want to commit an act of violence, to say, you are a liar, you are a traitor, there's no way that could be true. To me, it was indicative of the broader state of dissent in our country. Is speaking out has become a very dangerous thing in the United States.
USA har blitt ondsinnet, ifølge Taylor.
Ja, og han fortalte meg også at i løpet av den første presidentperioden til Trump så gikk dødstrusler mot kongressmedlemmer fra 900 til 10 000. Altså en 10-dobling første gang Trump var president. Og nå det, skal vi tro Taylor, langt farligere. Altså i Bergen så hadde han med kona og deres 8 måneder gamle baby, og de koste seg altså så fælt. Det var jo strålende vær og kirsebærblomstring og de hvite husene i åsen opp til fløyen der, vet du. Men viktigst av alt for denne lille familien, det var at de for første gang på en stund følte seg trygge. De var frie mennesker. Og det ganske sykt å tenke på, det altså amerikanere som kritiserer en folkevalgt president. Og for det her så altså han, altså Taylor, han da fiende av Trump, som pusser på ham sine tilhengere, så de ønsker å drepe han. Og Elin, ikke nok med det, nå han faktisk også under etterforskning.
Det snakker vi mer om etter en kort pause nå. Du hører på Bak nyhetene, en spesialutgave der Momentums Tuva snakker med Trump-varsler Miles Taylor, som skal til å fortelle om etterforskningen som presidenten har beordret på denne mannen som han har kalt landsforræder.
It's exactly the situation that I warned about. This is what I spent years trying to tell the American people, is that if Donald Trump came back, he would weaponize the tools of the American presidency to go after his rivals. And that's exactly what's happening right now. In fact, the executive order he put out against me is the first time in American history that a president has issued an order to investigate a personal rival for speaking out against him, ever. That's never happened in the history of our country. And I mean, I think he's doing it for obvious reasons, is he wants to send a message. He wants to send a message that if you criticize the president of the United States, your life will be ruined. And from our perspective, my wife and I and our family, if we let that happen, we create a really dangerous situation for anyone that comes after us. Mm-hmm. If we just bow down and accept that, then it becomes very, very easy to use that tactic and threat to get people to do whatever you want. And it's extraordinary to even say those words. We're not talking about the Stasi or Eastern Europe during the Cold War. We're talking about the United States of America that at one point was considered the paragon of free speech. And now there are folks like me who are fearing not just for their freedom, but potentially for their lives because they've criticized the president.
What law, it might be a stupid question, but what law does it refer to?
That's a great question, because I don't know the answer. That is how chilling this is. I don't know.
So he can prosecute without having a...
He can investigate without having a specific crime he thinks I've committed. That's what's so extraordinary about this to us, is that we believe currently there are federal investigators turning through every aspect of our lives. And it's already upended our lives. We've had to leave our jobs and change everything just because we've been blacklisted by the White House. Now, the president has alleged that I committed espionage. Okay, that means I stole classified information from the government to go reveal it. First of all, I did not. Second of all, it's really ironic to have him make that allegation because of the mountains of classified information he allegedly left the White House with himself. I would never be that stupid to do something like that. And yet, without any evidence, he's made that claim that somehow that's the crime I've committed, and therefore I must be investigated. That should really scare people, that there's no one to stop the president of the United States from just making false allegations about crimes and then launching into investigations of those people's lives. And as I've learned through this process just the past few weeks, there's very little that can stop him from bringing charges. If he wants to, he can bring charges. Now, they may not be good charges. They may fail in court, and we're very confident that we would win in any case against the president. But the fact that he can go there without any of the guardrails of democracy stopping him shouldn't just be a worry for my family. It should be a worry for any American who would dare to criticize the president.
I have so many questions. I mean, we're all kind of scared. So first of all, you don't seem very scared. Why is that? And how dangerous is he? How scared should we all be?
Yeah. Look, to me personally, I would say, I think it's important to put on a face of defiance because it sends a signal. If we run scared and act scared, and if my family doesn't respond, if I don't respond, then it looks like this tactic works. It looks like he can just cow people into silence. So to me, it's really important, even though it probably is detrimental to me in the long run, to be out there talking about this, shining a light on how truly insane this is from a legal perspective, a constitutional perspective, a moral perspective. But how scared should we be? We should be terrified that an American president is doing this. I mean, my wife and I weren't sure we were even going to be allowed to board a plane to travel over here to Norway. We've been waking up every morning anticipating that there will be a raid on our house. We had to update our last will and testament to name a guardian for our daughter because we are worried that this could end very badly and that something could happen to the two of us. That's every day that we're worried about our actual lives. That's how serious it is, but it's not about me. It goes so far beyond that because all it took was someone typing up an order at the White House and the president signing it with a pen. That's how easy it was to cause a family with a small baby to run and fear for their lives and lose their livelihood and be uncertain about the future. It was easy. And if we don't make it harder for them, they will use that technique again and again against anyone that would be considered the president's enemies. And that, to me, sets a really scary precedent, not just in America, but anywhere in the Western world, that a leader might have autocratic tendencies, is if they think it's easy to go after their rivals, they'll do it.
It makes me so furious. And I know a lot of people, they just feel kind of lost. But what can we do? What can I do to fight?
Two things. First, I think folks need to wake up. We keep telling ourselves, it's not as bad as it looks. It's not as bad as it looks. I'm here to tell you, it's worse than it looks. The United States is in a much darker place than people realize. And Donald Trump is not going to soften his message or check himself. It's going to get darker. And I think people aren't prepared for that. But I've spent the past 7 years telling people the sky is falling. And now I think a lot of folks feel like, oh yeah, the sky is falling. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Donald Trump will likely defy judicial orders. He will go past whatever guardrails people think still exist, and it will get worse. So that's step one, is people need to be very cold, hard, realistic about how scary the situation is and how little will stop this man from blowing past the democratic norms in the United States. But the second thing that people can do is the hard thing of standing up and actually speaking out against it. And I specifically mean Western governments are very afraid right now to criticize what they're seeing in the United States. Why? Because Donald Trump has shown them he can do the same thing that he's doing to me, is he can gain leverage over them and threaten them with things like tariffs, with things like shutting off intelligence collaboration. There's all sorts of tools that he can use. And if America's allies let him do that, then the tactic will work, and they will silence leaders from holding America to account. What this administration needs more than anything is for Western governments to stand up to it and say, look, this is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. You can't destroy the post-World War order that we built together to protect the West, and you can't do that unilaterally. You can't undercut NATO. You can't turn against your allies without consequences. And so far, I don't think most Western governments have done that. There's a great deal of fear about what Donald Trump could do, and we need there to be someone to stand up to the administration. Otherwise, I think at the back end of these 4 years, the Western world's going to look very, very different, because Donald Trump has no interest in preserving it. He does not believe in NATO. He does not believe in democracy as the ultimate end state of a polity. He doesn't think that's where we should end up. His inclination is to be friends with autocrats. His inclination is that a president should be all-powerful. His instincts are all contrary.
On a citizen level, so what we can do is to support the politicians that we know will stand up against him.
I think on the citizen level, people need to tell their governments, don't cave to this administration. We're with you. Because I think leaders in a lot of European governments are worried that if they stand up to Trump and then their country is hit with tariffs or punishment from the United States, well, then the people will be upset and say, why did you put us in this situation where, the price of American whiskey is now higher? Why did you put us in this situation where our economy is not as good? So it starts with people signaling to their governments, no, we understand there might be consequences to standing up against America, and for them to be okay with that. And to say, we get it, but we would prefer our governments aren't threatened by Washington into doing things or accepting things we otherwise wouldn't accept. I think if leaders in European governments hear that, they'll have stiffer spines in standing up to what we've already seen as egregious behavior on the part of the president. And just as an example would be how Donald Trump has handled Ukraine and the total humiliation that he has put upon the leadership of Ukraine, and the willingness to treat it like some sort of real estate deal that he's doing, that he's trying to exact concessions for mineral rights from Ukraine. He's trying to make money off of the plight and the deaths of Western citizens who are fighting for their lives. He's trying to make money off of that. No leader in NATO, no leader in the West should accept that. They should be not just telling the White House in private how egregious that is. They should be publicly protesting against Donald Trump's mishandling of this situation in Ukraine. But we're not seeing as much of that because I think a lot of leaders are afraid of upsetting Donald Trump. And this is, again, it's a much larger example of what I'm dealing with personally. You know, Donald Trump said something one time when I was in the Oval Office. He told a group of us that when he was in business, he learned that if you threaten to sue someone, they won't take you seriously. They'll go psh and wave their hand and say, go ahead, threaten to sue me. And they'll keep doing the thing that you don't want them to do. But if you actually sue them, whether you have a case against them or not, they will so fear the process of the lawsuit that they will settle with you and they'll do what you want. That story he told us has been very instructive to me about everything he does. Donald Trump doesn't just want to threaten people. He wants to sue them so they settle with him. It's why he's actually investigating my family, is he wants us to reach the conclusion that we should just shut up and not criticize him. And it's why he's put tariffs on the entire world, because he knows it gives him leverage and that people will come to heel and they'll do what he wants. That lesson that he allegedly learned in business is now how he's running what was once the freest country in the world.
Is he smart?
Is he smart? Han smart? Det du spør om, Tuva?
Ja, altså Donald Trump smart? Det lurte jeg veldig på fra en som har jobbet tett på ham, og det svarer han veldig tankevekkende på, synes jeg. Svaret her, det har jeg fortalt mange om, både på mediedager og senere.
Og det får lytterne våre i neste del av dette intervjuet, som ligger ute allerede nå.
Ja, og så får jeg han også til å kommentere hva Jens og Jonas egentlig burde gjort da de var over dammen og foran peisen i det ovale kontoret, og der kommer han også med kule betraktninger, synes jeg.
Du har hørt Bak nyhetene med Elin Ludvigsen og Tuva Jorfald. Tuva har gjort intervjuet og klippet denne episoden.
Og lyddesign ved Nils Johan Halvorsen for anledningen.
Vi har ny e-postadresse. Du kan maile oss på hei@momentummedia.no hvis du har innspill til denne episoden eller har noe annet på hjertet. Og nå er det bare å kaste seg over del 2 av intervjuet med Miles Taylor, som ligger ute der du måtte ønske å høre det. Og alt dette ligger også på Momentum sin kanal på YouTube, og der kan du også se bilder av Miles Taylor og Tuva.
Jepp, og bilder av Miles Taylor og Trump, tror jeg til og med.